So I'm just going to tell you guys a little bit about like what personal injuries is. These are like abbreviations that are very common throughout personal injury. DOI is date of incident, MVA, motor vehicle accident, BI is bodily injury, UIM is uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage. We have PIP, med pay. We have an SOL, which is statute of limitations, which is 2 years after the date of incident here in the state of Georgia. Personal injury basics is like motor vehicle accident, slip and fall, premise case, pretty much anything that you have damage from an incident or an accident that caused damage to you. Getting a settlement from damages that were caused to your client. This is like a very vague timeline of what a personal injury case is from start to finish. So the beginning, you're going to gather case and client information. Then you're going to get your client to treatment, make sure they are starting to feel better immediately. And then you're going to gather policy information from the insurance company. Throughout that whole process, you're going to continue to monitor your client's treatment. And why that's so important is because if the client has like any gaps in treatments or they're not doing what they need to do to get better, such as like getting MRIs, getting images, that stuff is needed in order to show if there's herniation, like permanent damages from the incident that happened. So monitoring your client's treatment is very important. You just make sure they are doing what they need to do to get better. And then once the client is released from treatment, you're going to gather all the medical bills and records, and then you're going to prepare the demand to the insurance company, whether it's the at-fault, UIM, personal. Once the demand is submitted, you're going to start negotiations for the settlement for the insurance company for your client. Once a settlement is agreed upon, you're going to get reductions on your medical bills for your client and get the settlement package rolled out. And then you're going to pay your client and you're going to pay all the medical bills and if there's any liens or anything like that. So that's kind of a really rough from start to finish of what a PI case is. An acceptable gap in treatment depends on what stage of treatment the patient is in. Anything over a month, if they're treating with orthopedic and physical therapy, they haven't been to the orthopedic in maybe a month and a half, but they're still treating with a physical therapist, then that's not a gap in treatment. They're not missing care. If they come in and they need scans like MRIs, they need to get those as soon as possible. Key information and just documents to gather throughout the process is the more information you have on the client, the better you are equipped to handle the case. If there's been prior injuries that they're treating for, if they've had like a prior back surgery and they re-injured their back in the incident, that's good information to have to be equipped to handle those conversations with the adjuster when it comes to negotiations. Getting the client into treatment as soon as possible is very key, not only for their health, but also so there are no gaps in treatment. The sooner the client gets into treatment, it just shows that they are hurt and there are injuries, so it's not a lot to have to fight with on the back end of things. 3 must-have documents that are must-have is accident report, incident reports, insurance deck pages, and then of course the medical bills and records. You can't really do much without the medical bills and records. So 2 different types of insurance coverage. So the first one is like bodily injury. That's the liability insurance. That's the at-fault insurance, whoever's at fault for the accident. So this determines the main coverage on these cases, money you can get from the settlement. Georgia state minimum is $25,000, $25.50. That means it's $25,000 per person, $50,000 per accident. Acceptance of liability insurance is a must. You need to always hear that it's accepted or denied. And if it's been denied, you need to figure out what's the reason for the denial. That denial is going to let you know if you can use the UIM coverage, which is uninsured, underinsured coverage. Word versus word, which is he said, she said. They can't figure out who's at fault. And another reason is the coverage issues. They didn't pay their insurance bill. The policy lapsed. So there is no active coverage on this vehicle that caused the accident. Your client is at fault. And there's also other ways that you can tell that your client is at fault prior to the insurance company denying liability. UIM. So that's uninsured, underinsured. It is exactly what it sounds like. If the car that hit you is uninsured, then your coverage will come into effect. Full coverage is when you have UIM coverage. So you have extra layer of protection to cover you yourself that got into an accident, whether it was your fault or not. Uninsured is exactly what I said. If the accident was not your fault, but the car that hit you has no insurance, your uninsured motorist coverage will come into play. And it will have no effect on your monthly premiums or anything like that, because you pay for this coverage every month. Underinsured is, let's say the person that hit you has active coverage, but you get really messed up. You have to have all these surgeries and the medical bills are super high and they only have $25,000 state minimum. So your medical bills are way over $25,000. Then your underinsured motorist coverage will come into play. The person that hit me is underinsured for the amount of damages I had. So after the bodily injury money is gone and it's been given, you can go to your underinsured motorist coverage. MedPay, which is medical payments, and PIP. PIP is not popular in Georgia, but most other states have it. If you have coverage, like someone's visiting in Georgia and the accident happens in Georgia, they might have PIP coverage from a different state. So that's why I think it's important to touch on that. And it's called personal injury protection. So these are extra layers of coverage, money to help you with the injuries that you got in the accident. It's money that goes directly towards your medical bills. And those coverages can range from like $1,000 to $5,000, $10,000, however you pay for it. Money that goes directly to the medical facilities that pay off a portion of their bill. Same thing with personal injury protection, but there's a lot more stipulations and requirements to it. Like you have to file in a certain amount of days. You have to make sure that the client is seen within a certain amount of days. That ranges from state to state. It's very important when you do see that coverage that you ask for what the stipulations and requirements are to receive that PIP coverage. Here are some examples of deck pages. Things to look for when you have a declaration page. A page that is going to tell you exactly what that policy's coverage is. Things you need to look for is per person per accident. If there's multiple people in one accident, you know you're not going to get $25,000 per person because the max it can be paid out is $50,000. Umbrella policies, underline policy saying, hey, here's your bodily injury coverage, but we do have an umbrella policy saying it's $1 million or however it might be. So once you reach this amount and an X amount is paid out, you can open up to this umbrella policy. Big trucks on the road, they're going to have those umbrella policies. So it's always important to either look for those on deck pages or to ask the adjuster, hey, are there any umbrella policies? A $25,000 policy normally is not going to have an umbrella policy. MedPay is another thing to look at. For UM, you need to look at and see if it's add-on or reduced. When you are like a person going to get insurance coverage, they should explain this to you, but they do a really poor job of explaining it. For UM coverage, there's what's called add-on or reduced. No matter what, liability is always going to come first. Like that's your first layer of coverage. That needs to be received in its entirety in order to even go to UM. So if you have $25K liability coverage, you have $25K of reduced UIM coverage, you technically have no UIM coverage because you're reducing this amount by this amount. $50K of reduced coverage, you technically only have $25K because you're taking this amount and reducing it by that. So on and so forth. If it's $100, $2K, like you just continue to do that. This client has $25K add-on coverage. The total coverage for this accident is $50K because you're adding it on to the liability. It's honestly so pointless for them to even offer you $25K reduced for UIM, for underinsured motorists, because you're never really going to be able to use it. No. You're only going to use it when it's uninsured motorists, because if it's underinsured, the person that hit you has $25K, you're never going to be able to use that. Mm-hmm. But you can only use it if the person that hit you has no insurance, then you'll be able to use it. No matter what the add-on coverage is, if it's $50,000, if it's $100,000, so on and so forth, you're going to add it to this number. So it's going to be $75K, $125K. So it's just adding on to whatever the first layer of coverage is. And then reduced by is subtracting by the first layer of coverage. General liability, bodily injury. This is $1 million policy from the at fault. Added personal injury protection, or equivalent to add-on no-fault insurance. UIM is no fault because you're not at fault for the accident. So it's saying that you have to go to the company and the insurance company and say, hey, which state did this come from? Because it's saying that this is a big, broad policy They go to all different states, so which state is this specific to? And then the next one is bodily injury 100, 300, med pay 5,000. This is 25,000 per policy. Per car, that's the property damage coverage that they can max pay out for your car that got hurt. And the next one is BI, so that's what you're going to go off of, is bodily injury, and that's 50, 100. A lot of these deck pages don't say add-on or reduced. You need to ask that and ask for the deck page that says add-on or reduced, so you will know. You need to get the adjuster involved and do a global settlement as fast as you can. And what a global settlement is like for incidents just like this, when there's a lot of people in an accident with low policy limits, or if there's a few people in the accident, but people have catastrophic injuries and other people don't. They do what a global settlement is saying, hey, we're all going to meet together, and I'm going to say, these are the medical bills. You're getting 2,000, you're getting 10,000, you're getting blah, blah, blah. So that's when you have to like be really on top of the insurance adjusters. It's a perk that they were on a bus, because that means hopefully the bus has a commercial policy, so that UIM will come into effect. If they were just riding a bus because they were with their friend and they wanted to ride a bus, but they have their own car insurance policy, and the car was just at home, that's called UIM, resident relative. That's when they can use their own coverage, even though they weren't driving their car or their car wasn't anywhere near the accident. They can use their own coverage because car insurance follows the person, not the car. That's why it's important to know your policy and what you're signing up for. That's when insurance companies say like, hey, did you give Maddie permission to drive your car? And I would say, yes, I gave Maddie permission to drive my car. The car is going to be insured for her because I allowed her to drive it. She had the owner's permission to drive it. Someone that drives the car on a daily basis like needs to be on the policy. Accident reports. It's very important. There's a few key things that you always want to look at when you receive an accident report. You're always going to want to confirm the date of incident, because that's going to be a very important date throughout the whole process of the case. And you want to figure out who is vehicle 1 and who is vehicle 2. 90% of the time, yes, it's correct. Vehicle 2 is not at fault most of the time, but sometimes cops just don't care and they're really fast and they just want to get it done. And then the policy information is on here. You want to look at the narrative of the accident report. There's going to be passengers in the accident reports, but it's going to be listed on like a different page. 1 and 2 are always going to be the drivers of the vehicle. So you might have clients that are passengers of the vehicle. It's going to be listed and after the narrative. Driver 1 did this, driver 2 did this, blah, 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 blah. It's like the description of the accident from the police officer that wrote the accident report. The date of incident is always going to be in the corner, and this is Georgia accident reports. Accident reports look very different for each state. If you get an accident report from a different state, just look at it very thoroughly. The insurance coverage. So it's going to have the insurance name, which just says State Farm, and it's going to have the policy number. The policy number is going to identify that person's coverage. A claim number is what's going to be what's specific to that accident. Citations. So citations is like a ticket. It's important to always look at this because you can see that citations were given for number 1, but not number 2. It doesn't say exactly what that citation is. You can Google what those citations are, or the narrative normally tells you what it is. Driver 1 stated he was traveling south on Spear Road near North Mill Road when he stated he looked down because of a bug. So that just already mentions like he wasn't paying attention. So that works in our client's favor. Stated that he looked up and noticed traffic came to a stop when he struck vehicle 2 in the rear. It's saying he stated, he stated, he stated. And you can always order dash cam footage if there's any dispute in liability. There's different ways around that. Vehicle 2 states that she was traveling south on Spear Road near North Mill Road when traffic came to a stop. So she was at a complete stop. Brooks stated while she was awaiting traffic to move forward, she was struck by vehicle 1. This last sentence, you won't catch this often, but you get lucky, like you get giddy when you see it. It says the investigation concludes that driver 1 was at fault for the accident. It like clearly states there like driver 1's at fault, which not all police officers do that, but that just is a couple things to look at on accident reports. Just a few like pitfalls and red flags is like missed policy limits. Don't ever assume that there's unlimited policies. Like not even when someone says, oh, a truck hit me, a big truck hit me. Depending on if it's a CDL or not, they're not required to have like big policy limits. So you got to make sure you talk to the adjusters, get the deck pages, all of that stuff. Working on a lien versus working under health insurance. There's lots of caveats, and it's very intuitive when it comes to health insurance. Health insurance have like certain clauses, it's called segregation clauses, that says, hey, if this person receives a settlement from an MVA accident, we're not paying for anything. A lien is pretty much just a promise to pay. So it's saying, hey, if you or your client receive a settlement for this accident that we're treating them for, we're going to treat them like normal, pay for everything, and then once the settlement comes, you're going to pay us back. Okay. It's a struggle to prove liability, especially in those situations where it's he said, she said. So getting the police report is really important. Gaps in treatment. It's just one way of an insurance adjuster saying, hey, your client really wasn't hurting, because if they were hurting, they would have went to the doctor every month. So it's, like I said, it's important to make sure your client's treating and staying on top of it, because we all know life gets in the way and things happen in life, so just making sure you're there to like follow up on that. And that's also the benefit of like having someone like me on the orthopedic side, because I'm going to email you and I'm going to say, look, patient Joe isn't showing up for a treatment. I can't get him on the phone. Can you jump in? So that's the perk of like one thing that Barbour Orthopaedics offers, is like just an extra layer of case management. Not knowing about prior accidents and prior injuries, you would rather know than the adjuster tell you about them. You would rather be prepared for those scenarios instead of being told about them. Not getting the reason for a denial for liability is important, because you could have a denial because the coverage wasn't paid for. They're not responsible, the bill wasn't paid. So it's really important you get those, so you know if you're going to use and if you can use UM/UIM coverage. Always, when in doubt, just ask. Just ask.